Welcome to today's program. We're focusing on the history of Doling Park. This is one of several in a series of Springfield history that I hope you're enjoying. You can find them all on YouTube under Richard Crabtree. Just look for my photo, which, by the way, happens to be here because I'm sponsoring this video. I'm a realtor working with Murney Associates. I specialize on the sale and marketing of older homes. I also do their history and help people with restoration. So if you're in need of such a person, I would love to help. On with the presentation. Well, the Giboney family has been long associated with Doling Park. They had moved to Springfield around 1840 and acquired 40 acres of land. Alexander and Sarah, mom and dad, are the ones who set everything up, but they put the land in the title of James and John. I guess he thought in the very distant future he would not be surviving. The Giboney family farm, the Giboney family stayed on the land for almost 30 years. They built a cabin overlooking the lake near the current Doling Park Museum. They sold the land to James Marshall Doling on August 6 of 1883 for a whopping $2,500. This picture has been attributed to be the Giboney family, and this is in front of a cabin. It was more of a tourist spot that they had built in front of the cave. It is no longer there, of course. Well, James Marshall Doling was a colorful character. He had came to town and was a successful merchant, and of course he was on Commercial Street upon coming to Springfield. He had an extensive family, as you can see in this photograph. He had opened his store, which also was a mason's hall on the third floor. Doling's store was at 211 and 215 East Commercial Street. Many of you know that store today as Mrs. Gilmore's, but it is pretty much still intact, and it was one of two stores that he had in town. The other one is no longer standing. So how did Mr. Doling find this place and decide to make it a park? Well, the rumor or story goes that in 1883, while looking for his lost cow, which he had to wander quite a ways because he lived over at 409 Lynn Street, he came across a meadow with a stream flowing out of a cave forming a lake. He decided on his first visit that this should be a park. Well, in steps Robert Lee Doling. Robert Lee would be the one who would be put in charge of the park. He and his father had built a house on the grounds, and after improving the grounds, the park would be opened in the late spring of 1884. Here's a photograph taken in 1886, and you can see that they had done some improvements. They tried to block off part of the lake so people wouldn't fall in. It was interesting that there's stumps out in the lake, that they just cut the trees off. You aren't deceiving yourself. There is a steamboat directly ahead, which I'll be getting into shortly. And, of course, you see the house that they had built by the lake for them to summer in. So they built the summer vacation house. They enlarged the lake. They added fish. They dug out more of the cave because it was filled up. They added an ice house because it used to freeze a lot easier back then, and they needed the ice. They built a bath pavilion, a pavilion for eating and dancing and so forth, and a theater. They installed some concessions like popcorn and ice cream and lemonade and so forth. They also had swimming, boating, picnicking, swings, crazy water acts, hot air balloons, dancing, a lantern show, and vaudeville, of course. This was actually a place that they tried about everything they could to get people to flock out there. Some things were successful and some things were big flops. And, of course, here is the swings that I had mentioned. You can kind of see one of the bridges in the background. It's interesting that you see some Missouri mules with the kiddos. Look like donkeys, but I believe they're mules. Well, the Doling Park Pavilion Restaurant and Bathhouse was hugely popular as they had multiple dances, and of course, people liked getting out on the lake. What was interesting is they needed a bathhouse to change because obviously men and women couldn't change together, and of course, the bathing suits were pretty much covered most of the body. So it was an interesting sight to see. Lots of swimming competitions, lots of canoeing, lots of listening to music at night going across the lake. It would have been quite serene at the time. And here is something that was right outside of the cave, and that's kind of circular spot is still there. We can see up on the hill the house, their summer house, and of course the pavilion and the bathhouse in the background. Well, Doling Park was known for concerts, and before some of the other folks that we've talked about that had concerts out there, Hobart's would be out there, and the Springfield Military Band that would actually kind of lead into having other bands out there that are more well known to us that I've talked about in other presentations. So, like Hoover specifically. Here's another one of the military bands that showed up under their little pavilion that they had there to entertain the many throngs. And this was quite popular. Many cities across Missouri had their own bands, but then they would try to get bands in from Europe. They just seemed to ooze more class. Well, ice cream and lemonade, popcorn, soda pop, all those good things that you need to drink and eat while you're walking around out there. They built these little wooden huts, very primitive looking, but they did the trick. And they had electric lights strung out there so they could be open late at night. Well, how are you going to get there? Doling Park is way the heck up in North Springfield. Even from the square, it's quite a walk. Thank goodness we had the streetcar line, or the Springfield Transit Company. And the traction company, initially this was actually an independently owned branch and then was put together with Springfield Traction Company. They would go up there on Broadway, it would be later known, and get up there to where the zoological gardens, or you could cut over and go to Doling Park. You see both branches here. So you could get there by streetcar. I'm sure it was quite a long ride. Here's a view of how it looked in 1929 as they would head up there. They did more of a loop now, taking you over to the park, and then it would loop back down to Commercial Street. Here's some more views of the streetcar line. It was primitive. I mean, they just, where they didn't pave, they just laid it in the dirt, covered it back up with dirt again. And later on, they tried to improve those lines and those roads. You can see here in the bottom picture the actual loop now that they had built inside the park. For one of the spots to have the people rest while they're waiting for the streetcar, well, they took an old streetcar and just took the side off of it and just stuck it on the side there. So the park is sold in 1907. The company is now called the Doling Park Amusement Cold Storage Company. Benjamin Myers and Charles Brooks and William Jezzard, they acquired it for a whopping $10,000. So the folks did make some money on the deal, so they weren't unhappy. But now they were really going to push and advertise and promote all the wonders that the park had. Here's a slide showing from 1907 with their names on it, the new owners, embracing what they expect to do at the new park. So what did they do? What were the new attractions? Well, now we have a skating rink, merry-go-round, circle swing. They had picture shows. Of course, they had lantern shows before. Boating was there and the theater, but now they've added a Ferris wheel. Ping pong, you didn't think that would be a big deal. Bathing, of course, was there. Chute-the-chutes, which we'll be talking about here shortly. Dancing, that was already there. Penny Arcade, that was new. Shooting gallery, and of course the cave that had been there. And here's a wonderful postcard from that era showing all the things that we just discussed. Of course, the skating rink would be improved later on, but we'll discuss that when it comes up. And here we start talking about the cave. Well, the Giboney cave, and there's a long discussion here about Mr. Giboney, talking about the land and acquiring and that. But basically, the cave is known as the Giboney Cave since they were the first to be there. They refer to this little building as being the pump house. And if you look at the bottom photograph, you can actually see there's a pipe going to the water. So the water they would suck out of the cave would go to the pump house and then be distributed on the property, used in the fountains and other things where they needed water. Taking a photo, well, everybody wanted a picture taken by the cave. And of course, those that have been around caves, especially like the one down at Silver Dollar City, you know it's pretty well climate controlled. It's about 50 to 60 degrees all year long. So you can imagine being close to that when it's 90 to 100 degrees outside. Felt pretty doggone good, especially with no air conditioning at the time. And of course, they would, since it's kind of a built-in little amphitheater down there, they decided to have lots of picnics there, again, hoping for that cool water breeze to kind of blow through there and keep everybody comfortable. And it was easy to string lights there, so it would have been quite an interesting thing to see. And later in the 50s and 60s, they would have school picnics, and they would wander down through there. The cave has been dug out over the years to increase its size. There was a lot of muck and mud and stuff in there. There are some waterfalls in the deepest part of the cave. You can transverse in, about 600 feet. Some people had some crazy notions that you could actually go all the way to downtown. That simply is not true. If you look at an overhead view, you will see that the cave pretty much stops as far as being able to traversing it about the second base at the baseball diamonds at the entry of the park. Of course, here's the present day view. It hasn't really changed much, although they've cleaned it up and taken out the big pipe. And you can see that the stream is just crystal clear. And I know when I've been there, it's very peaceful, and a lot of people like walking there in the morning to enjoy the sound of the stream. Well, let's talk about the lake. The lake has been photographed and numerous postcards. It's always been a special place, and fortunately many of us never got to experience being in that lake, as it has since been closed off. But it covered 5 acres. At one time, the depth was as deep as 15 feet. Has been enlarged numerous times over the years and slightly actually decreased. It was stocked with fish, carp and catfish and bass. It was used for ice harvesting and, of course, the boating and swimming. And something you wouldn't think about, but many of folks were baptized in that lake. So here we have some of the ice harvesting that you would have seen out there, and then they have actually had ice stored in the cave and then the ice house. And of course that was distributed to be used for rail cars and or for people to have ice during the summer. Skating was very popular, and here's a family out there in 1899, all bundled up in their nicest Sunday attire, going out there to skate. Boating had been a big pastime. That's something that would be fun to see again. But we have to talk about the one thing I mentioned earlier, steamboat. So when Raphael went up to St. Louis, and he acquired a beautiful wooden steamboat, and he brought it back here in 1886. Had it shipped down by the Frisco, and then they had it brought over here and plopped it in the lake. And you could just imagine what it was like to steam around that lake. That would have been quite a sight to see. And of course, many other people would just go out there and rent a boat and row around and possibly go out there on first dates. Or you could be like this gentleman and take 4 women with you. Maybe one will work for you. But people love going out there and just watching the people boat and swim. And occasionally there would be a swimming contest. Even Doling themselves, they just talked about that this is a place to come for romance. It awaits you on the lake. And perhaps you may get your first kiss. Who knows? Swimming was a very, very big deal. There was a lots of competitions out there for swimming, and they would advertise these quite often, and they would get some pro swimmers and local swimmers and see who could win the whatever prize they offered at the time. Swimming suits were very popular, and they would advertise them quite often in the magazines or the newspapers to get folks out there to purchase them so that they would be properly attired for the rest of the bathing public. And of course, it was a way to cool off. Again, no air conditioning, and that water coming out of the cave feeding the lake would be a little bit cooler than some, and I'm sure it felt great. We don't think much about this today. I mean, we watch some Olympic swimming competition on TV, but swimming across a long lake, it was exhausting. And a lot of people would just simply collapse when they got done. But boy, they were in great shape. And of course, you have the bathing beauties. My, oh my, can you imagine seeing ladies in swimsuits like this today? But I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder when it comes to bathing suits. And of course, as I mentioned before, there was many a folk baptized out there at Doling Lake, and that was quite popular in big lakes here in the Ozarks. This is probably the most famous thing that's ever been connected with Doling Park outside the cave, and that was chute-the-chutes. It was only there a short time, 1907, 1915. And here's an ad talking about chute-the-chutes. It was a big deal. These were actually ones you would see all over the country, and they were not something that were just indigenous to Springfield. There were many variations. Probably the largest one was out in New York. They had a beautiful one out there. Here are some views that we have from the top. There were different variations. Some tracks had a dummy that would pull the boat up out of the water to the top. Some people just had to climb. This one actually had two releases, and you just had to basically walk back over and climb the many steps to the top again. And here we can see somebody who has just been launched and came down and hit the lake. But now for a very rare treat, you're going to actually get to see this in action. And here we go. That looked like a lot of fun, didn't it? I wouldn't mind actually doing that. As you can see, this one actually had the dual track system where it would bring the cars up out of the water with the folks in it. Well, as I mentioned before, Lee Hoover, he would bring his band out here a lot. He would go to Phelps Grove, but this one I think paid a little bit more money because there was more people buying things out there. And Doling Park became one of his key places for him to start off early on, playing and experimenting and getting his group together. Picnicking at Doling Park was a big deal, again, because of the lake and being cool and the trees that were out there. That was a thing that a lot of people enjoyed doing. And we have lots of family photographs of people going out there to picnic around there. Just imagining seeing people in these clothes, the heavy wool clothes in the summertime with the big hats on. But hey, that's what they had to wear. And here's actually a group of high school kids, or my apologies. This is actually this is a group from Drury. They came out here in 1909, and this was kind of their last hurrah before graduating. And many of folks went out there to have their school picnics. I know when I posted on my history page, many people have talked about going out there for this very thing, and they were quite popular. It's a shame they don't do that still today. Baseball, well, baseball was a big deal out there. They actually have had a baseball diamond out there for well over 100 years. Many local teams, including the Frisco Flash, as you see here, participated there. So where were the diamonds? Well, we can actually see them here in this very early. This is taken in 1936. This overview, and you can see where the diamond is. Now it's changed over the years, where they've had the bandstand or the grandstand and diamond, but for the most part, it's been in the same locale. Here's a early 1910-ish picture. It's like that. No dogs unless you have a chain or a muzzle. But you can see the grandstand there in the background. It has since been flipped to the opposite side in later years. And here's a great photo. This was taken at Doling back in July 12th of 1914 when a baseball team had came to town. The Newburgh Ball Club, connected with the Frisco, came to play. And Springfield lost, Frisco team lost, but Newburgh won. And then here we have the Her Airedales. They were playing in the city competition in 1929, and they actually won. So they would actually have some semi-pro ball games out there. In later years, though, it had become more Kiwanis and JCs and other teams like that. Today, there is no big stand out there. In fact, there's virtually nothing really to sit on, just a backstop. Well, Independence Day was a very big thing out here because of the lake and being able to have a lot of places for folks to sit around. So for 90 years, they had this massive fireworks display out at Doling Park, and it was quite something to see. And here's an ad actually advertising it here over 100 years ago. $1,000 worth of free fireworks on display, no charge. And here's a beautiful photograph showing that very thing. You can see the lake in the foreground and just to the right part of the bridge that went over the lake. Well, the end is near, 1972. We see these guys here actually getting ready to put up some of the last fireworks that would be out there. July 4th, 1977 was the last time that we had any fireworks shot off at Doling Park. Well, up to this point, the park had been in private hands, but the city decided that they would acquire this park, and they acquired it for the tidy sum of $85,000. So we went from $2,500 to $10,000 up to $85,000. Well, we haven't talked about the roller rink. I know lots of folks have skated all over Springfield at different places, and this one was quite popular. The first one had been there since 1907, 1929, and it was more of mainly a wooden structure. The second rink was built in 1930. These next several photographs you're going to see is the WPA that was out there working. And you can see them doing some improvements with the old steam tractor. And here's another view as they're working on the rock walls and stuff that are out there that are still there today. And you can see the skating arena in the background. And when it opened up, they had 503 visitors showed up that day to go out there and skate. And it was a huge success. Many people went out here to learn how to skate. There were many get-togethers and parties and so forth. You could hold about 300 skaters at one time. And, of course, as we got more into the 40s and 50s and that, there were many competitions. And there was a lot of competitiveness that would be out there in skating, especially now since by this time we're kind of waning doing anything in the water. The roller rink today, well, it's just part of the museum in the sense that the one wall is still standing, but unfortunately the Parks Board thought it was not in their best interest to sink the funds into it and restore it, so they tore down the middle section and just left the one wall. The Penny Arcade, well, this would be something to see as well. Now, the arcade and the roller rink and all this stuff, this was actually all being ran by a separate entity for the Parks Board, the rides and the arcades and so forth. They figured that was not their line of business, so they'd rather have folks that knew what they were doing take care of that. Many people enjoy going there. There's Giggling Gertie and the Gypsy Teller. that people enjoyed going to see when they would go out there to the arcade and getting cotton candy and shooting. Many a boy and many a girl dropped lots of money in this place. Of course, there were rides, and this is the one thing that people in the later years, they remember. There used to be the train that ran around the park. You could, at one time, ride the Dodgems. They had the Streamline Whip, the Ferris wheel, kiddie auto ride, merry-go-round, miniature train, fun in the dark, and Tub-a-Dub. These were all popular rides that were out there. And the miniature train actually was out there since the 1930s. It went from a steam, which I would love to have a photograph of and don't have, to the diesel or gas-powered. Of course, they had the Ferris wheel and the merry-go-round. They had two different sizes, one for the real small kiddos. And this is one. We got a color view of the Doling Park Ferris wheel. And here is the one for the merry-go-round. This is the smaller one. And, of course, many folks have mentioned the name Giggling Gertie, so here's a picture of her. The whip. This is something actually developed by a gentleman here in Springfield that came up with the concept of the whip. And then, of course, the barrels. But a lot of folks remember there was a roller coaster out there. The Wild Mouse, everything I researched and came across said it was 1969. A lot of people swear up and down it was there sooner, and it may have been something out there sooner. But it's well documented that the Wild Mouse that most people remember was put in place in 1969. Bumper cars and the Wild Mouse, the Ferris wheel, and the Fun House. The Parks Board stepped in 1977 because the current folks that were operating everything, they felt that they weren't keeping it up to snuff. And it wasn't too much longer after that most all the rides and the concessions were done for. And at that point in time, they were removed. So a good chunk of the park that a lot of folks remember was long gone. Well, today, the Parks Board has done an exceptional job trying to maintain and prolong the life of this park. In 2011, it went under an extensive draining of the lake and cleaning everything up and repouring walkways and just doing an investment so that this park would be with us for many years to come. And they did just a fine job. And if you go out there today, it's a wonderful place to walk around at really any time of the year. And now, of course, we have the Doling Family Center, which is massive. If you need a place you want to go work out, walk around, or just have a family event or go listen to people talk, this is a great place to go. And, of course, we have the Doling Park Museum. And there's was two people. Unfortunately, we lost the lady who was in the photograph. She passed away not too long ago. But there's at least one other folks that you can find out there on an occasion that will let you go in and see the goodies that they've collected over the years. She did, however, before she passed away, develop this book. So if you go to the main family center there, I think it's around $20. You can acquire the Doling Park of Yesterday book, and it's quite thick. She did quite a bit of research on it. So it's, if you're interested, it's something that I would definitely connect with the Parks Board and the Doling Family Center and get yourself a copy. Well, I'm hoping that you know of my website, so you have seen all these goodies. But if you aren't familiar with it, please look up Springfield, Missouri History, Landmarks, and Vintage Photography. And join. We're fast approaching 20,000 members. And we've got all sorts of goodies on there. And I do take requests and opportunities to research. Just be mindful that I get many, many requests per day, so it's hard to answer them all. And with that, I thank you for staying with me during this presentation of Doling Park, and look forward to showing you some more of Springfield's history in the very near future.